Welcome to Fall, Rise, Give, where we explore life's ups and downs through the lens of a mainstream drunk's design for living. Join us as we navigate the twists and turns of life, sharing stories of resilience, hope, and the power of giving back. Whether you're sober curious, in recovery, or simply seeking inspiration, this podcast is your go-to for real talk, raw emotion, and a whole lot of heart. Tune in and discover how to fall, rise, and give back in life's extraordinary journey. I'm one of your hosts, Bartender Bob. Actually, I would think, Kumar, that you're the host. I'm just kind of here to do the technical part.
No, I think I'm the. We're both the host. I think you're definitely the host because you've got the experience. I'm just here to provide some interesting thoughts and some content. But I think the conversation is really what it's all about. Kind of livening it up a little bit.
I agree. You know what? Conversation is the fun thing to do. I did talk radio for 30 years, and it's funny because being a talk radio host, people said, "Oh, you must talk a lot." And I said, honestly, I don't really talk a lot. I listen a lot. And listening is what it's all about. So, I mean, you pose a question and then and get an answer back, and that's kind of what we're doing,
Yep.
So, my friend Joanne that's now listened to the last few episodes that we've done, or the last couple of episodes that we've done. We were talking. She said, "So you really haven't talked to Kumar in 40 years since high school?" I said, "Well, it's closer to 37, but yeah." So we graduated high school in 87. And we haven't really talked except for one time. I interviewed you when you wrote a book. Probably, was that 15 years ago?
Yeah. I think it was 2013 or something like that. Yeah.
So what brought you to that point where you wrote your first book?
The first book was really trying to put on paper and blogging and all of this stuff to show my expertise, credibility in the world of digital marketing, digital advertising. Mm-hmm. At that point, I was a search expert in Google. When somebody typed in the word SEO, which stands for Search Engine Optimization, I would show up top 10 in Google out of like 300 million results.
Oh, wow.
I would go on to work at Microsoft as a search engine optimization product manager. I'd work for some other companies, some big companies. I would go out and speak at search conferences like the big one in Seattle called SMX Advanced and others on international search. So I became an expert in search, and I wanted to write a book before that to show that, hey, I really knew my chops. And so I became an expert in search, and that's why I wanted to do it. But that was just part of it. And maybe it was a training wheels, as you want to call it, for a bigger book that I really wanted to write, which was around, self-help, spirituality, goal setting, and now we're talking about it. It's about falling, rising, and giving. So this is really the book that I wanted to write about years ago, but I don't think I was ready back then, to be honest.
Well, don't you think it's funny how life kind of takes you to the things that you need in the part of your life where you actually need them?
Yeah, exactly. I don't think there are any accidents. I don't think. Sometimes people say, "Oh, I visualize all this and I do all of this work and I do this goal setting, but I never got my goals met." Well, maybe you weren't supposed to meet your goals met at that point. There was a lesson that you needed to learn before you met your goals and before you manifested that thing that you're trying to manifest or trying to achieve that vision for your life. I think life leads you into certain situations and scenarios so that down the road, as we're 55 now, Bob, we may have a lot more lessons. I don't think you should be listening to a success guru at the age of 25.
Right.
The guy doesn't have any life experience, but at the age of 55, we might have a couple of years of experience that we could probably help people out with.
Did you ever figure you'd have all these gray hairs or lack of hair in your life? When I was a kid, I was just actually. It's funny because on my Facebook earlier today, a picture of me from high school popped up from 2020. I posted it in 2020 because my twins graduated in 2020, and it was right when COVID began, and I was just kind of showing my support for the kids that were seniors, and I had a full head of hair, and it was long and it was curly, and my face was all like tight, and I looked like a young kid. I looked kind of like I do now, but just a hell of a lot younger. And I think to myself back when I was 18 years old compared to when I'm 55 years old now, and I'm like, did I do the things that I wanted to do that I was supposed to do? And then I kind of think back, I'm like, well, yes and no, and I've made some mistakes, as we all have, but I've made a lot of good choices as well,
Yeah, the thing I like about you, and I kind of mentioned it only as a, and I've told you this before, you're very content. You seem very happy. It doesn't matter what the life situation, circumstance is. You seem like a very content guy, and I think that's one of the keys to everlasting joy or long-term happiness or peace or whatever. Yeah, speaking of the hair loss, yeah, you lose it in the certain spots, you gain it in certain other spots, and the funny thing is, it's I don't want to be listening to a 25-year-old success guru or maybe a
Right.
guy in his early 30s at the very earliest. But I think when you get in your 40s or 50s, you get life experience, you've been through enough stuff, you definitely know a lot more what you're talking about. And I think those are the people that bring credibility. People should listen to other people that have been through information or situations that really know it, not read it in a book and talked about it, but really lived it. And that's kind of why we're here talking about stuff. We're actually living these things. We've lived certain things. We're continuing to evolve in our journey. So that's why we're here.
Exactly. So before we jump into our questions, I want to ask you about telling somebody off. Okay, but before we get to that, though, I know that you've mentioned in the last couple of podcasts that you're in Seattle. What brought you from Minneapolis, the Twin Cities area, to Seattle?
Oh, that's going to get into my rising scenario. We'll wait up on that completely in a few minutes down the road. But
Okay.
I came out to visit in 1990, in the fall of 1992 after graduation, and I absolutely loved the city. I had gone to with a bunch of friends to San Francisco, and there's 11 of us that went out there. Loved San Francisco, but it just didn't feel right. When I got back, a couple months later, I came out to Seattle. I was like, oh, if you combine Minneapolis, St. Paul with San Francisco, you get Seattle. It was green. It had hills and water like San Francisco does, but it had this more natural of a city that was lively, but it wasn't overcrowded like San Francisco was, and it wasn't as dry. And so I absolutely loved it. I current visualization of parks that I was in, places I got lost in the water on my own driving around town. And I knew at that point in 1992 I belonged in Seattle. It took me 6 more years later to get here. So success and knowing where you want to go can take a long time. It took
Right.
me 6 years after that to get to Seattle. Yeah, so it was a long journey.
Okay. Well, I wasn't sure if it was a love for coffee or a love for craft beers. And I know that we're talking about putting beers in the rearview mirror and stuff, but I don't know if it had something to do with one of those two.
Definitely the coffee culture, reading a book in the rain. Definitely college football, University of Washington football. I went to a game against Stanford. I thought they were an awesome team. And so I think the mountains and the water, and yeah, they have a great wine and local breweries as well. There's a wine country about 3 hours northeast of Seattle called Lake Chelan. They've got about 49 wineries there. Washington wineries are actually got pretty well renowned reputation. Some of the world's best wines come out of here nowadays.
Oh, very cool. So
Yes.
I wanted to start off then our podcast, or the official podcast part, with this thing. You'd sent me an outline of your book early on before we started doing this, and one of the title or one of the chapter names just grabbed me, and it was and I'm going to not say I'm not going to not say the one word, but I'm going to say telling a billionaire to F off. Now, is that something that you did?
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. So we'll talk about Minnesota days. So I graduated from college, came back in Wisconsin, went back to Minnesota through the help of a professor who helped me fund and gave me a lot of inspiration. I started a food company out of my laptop in 1992, 93.
Most
And
people use a kitchen.
I know, right? So it was a outsourcing type company. It was kitchen as well. Obviously, I learned to cook while I was in college. Some great Indian food from my mom, some Punjabi style cooking, and I started to perfect it. And everybody I cooked for loved my food, and so I thought I could start a food company, and I'd get some funding from aunts and uncles and those folks. So I started a food company where it took me a couple of years. I started selling the frozen foods to corporate cafeterias. My first customer was University of Minnesota Hospital Systems. They've got 3 large buildings there. University of Minnesota dorms, corporate cafeterias like Aramark, Canteen, Marriott Dining Services. They all started to buy my food and have a kind of a special Indian food night or Indian food day at lunch. And big airlines like Northwest Airlines at the time, which is now part of Delta, wanted to buy my food as well. People wanted more variety in their corporate cafeterias and work settings, right? So
Hmm.
Indian food was just coming on the scene. It's a pretty hot commodity nowadays in big cities, but back then it was just starting to get on the scene. It was obviously really popular in London and England and obviously India and Asia. So I started this food company. I had things were going well. I had customers that were growing. I had thousands of pounds of frozen food that I was selling. I had outsourced all the manufacturing to professional kitchens or manufacturing plants around Minnesota. As you know, Minnesota is a food capital with Iowa, Wisconsin. And so all was going well, except for I ran into some manufacturing problems as the volume started to go up. And I ran into a friend of a friend who introduced me to the chief operating officer of the Schwann's Food Corporation, and through them, I ended up presenting to the board of directors. One of the Schwann brothers came over to my mom's house for dinner, really wanted to check out the actual cooking to see, hey, is this guy authentic or not? I went to a couple of conferences with them, hobsnobbed with some of the biggest food company executives in Chicago. I went to Houston in their major food division and presented food there. And essentially, they were ready to buy my company. And I was waiting for an offer, and the first offer blew my mind in the sense of how bad it was. They
Oh, really?
basically offered me a job. I think it was like $80,000 a year and 0.4 or 0.5% of revenues from the Indian
Wow.
food that I'd be selling. It was like I already had tens of thousands of dollars worth of sales coming through a month already, and you're offering me a job and taking all my formulas, recipes for production turn into formulas. They're based on weights of spices and water and meat and sauces and all of that stuff. And so they were basically asking for everything for a job that they were giving me. And I had mentors who were pretty successful, some executives, like I don't want to mention his name, but a guy named ran a huge company out of Chicago, and he basically and everybody that I talked to, all the mentors said, "Hey, you can't take this offer. This is insulting. And by the way, somebody that offers you this, you got to walk away from this." So, in a very nice and polite way, I told them to F off and sent a very nice F off letter to all the executives that I had met, about
Right.
20 of them. And I basically said, thank you, but no thank you. I think we're done here with your first offer. I'm not interested in this. I'm basically going to close up shop here and be on my merry way.
So you didn't actually say the F word when you were talking to him. You just
I didn't
basically.
know. I was a very nice
Okay.
way but I left no door for them to come back to. Yeah, you got
Got
to
the
be
whole
nice when you
Minnesota
tell
nice
people to
thing.
F off sometimes.
What happened to that company then?
Yeah, so I had to shut it down. I had no way out of the manufacturing issues. I had orders from big airlines and all that stuff that I had to kind of cancel. And that was a blessing because the food business is very tough. The margins are very thin. And I had a degree in information systems, and I was a computer guy. I was on Prodigy and email, buying books back in 92, 93. I was reserving URLs in 94, 95. I was an internet guy ready to make technology happen. And that's where my calling started. Right after that, a buddy of mine was starting an internet company in Minneapolis in the restaurant business. Think of DoorDash in 1994. It would start out as something like mndine.com, minnesotadine.com. You have a website with all your menu items, all that stuff. We did all that. I
Oh,
basically
wow.
went around and sold all the restaurants, all the major restaurants in Twin Cities, an ad or a web page. We did that. It wasn't going to scale. I ended up getting a corporate job um, that would lead me to Seattle 2 years later. But basically, my mind was on the internet company, and the internet was hot. Everywhere you went, internet was internet with this, internet that. This is 1996, and the number one reason I did not want to move to Seattle was I had no connections.
Mm.
Can you imagine a kid from Minnesota so naive that he doesn't want to go to a major internet town that founds companies like Amazon and Microsoft and all these hot startups? And
Right.
I wasn't ready to move there because I didn't know anybody. I'd rather be in my cocoon in Minneapolis at the time. That's what was my thinking.
You moved from India at the age of what, 12?
Yeah,
13
13.
to
Yeah,
Minneapolis. So I mean you basically started over then and then you were wow. And now look at you.
yeah, I know, right? Exactly. And so, anyway, that's the main reason I want to move. I made the move. a corporate move. I would end up working as a major account manager for this big IT analyst firm. I think I'm fine to say their name, but not going to. I ended up working with Microsoft, Boeing, State of Washington accounts. I made a ton of money. I started my MBA at night at Seattle University, a big Catholic Jesuit school. And there I met some guys. And the guys and I told them about a URL that I had that was very fascinating. And we decided, and I dropped out of school and quit my corporate job in 1999, 1998, 1999. And I ended up starting an internet company with these guys. We went around town and went over the country raising investment dollars. We raised a few $1,000,000. We had executives from major corporations like Microsoft and Yahoo and some Windstar was a big company out there back at the time. And so we started an internet company. We struggled to raise the money at first, but once it clicked, money was coming in like there's no tomorrow before the 2000 crash of the internet. And make the long story short, all the struggles that I had through in the past and all the falling of that company that shut down, applied all those experiences in getting this internet company set up. Would not take no for an answer from customers, from investors, just fought my way through it, raised the millions of dollars, had a major corporation like Microsoft, top man today, one of the executives of my mentor at the time, gave me 3 hours of his time at the time there. He's one of the top 5 the guys at Microsoft today, and ended up creating this company, had huge customers, Yahoo, MSN, AOL, and we ended up turning around in 2001, selling it for tens of millions of dollars. And it was a happy ending for our investors and for some of us who were founding the company.
So what kind of company was it, or don't you want to talk about that?
Yeah, it was a search company. I told you earlier in the conversation I was a search expert, and part of the reason I was a search expert is because I understand how search engines work. Search engines basically have little software robots that go out and aggregate information from the internet. And they would basically go out and say, okay, and they call them web crawlers at the time, and now they call them AI and all of this stuff. But basically these software robots or spiders would go on the internet and say, oh, interesting, you got a page here. Oh, your page links to all these pages. Great, I'll go to those pages next. And then off it goes. And then it collects all that information, sends it back to a database and says, hey, I've got 10 different websites here about food, 20 about sports, 10 about music. It starts categorizing all of this information. And search engines will say, okay, somebody comes in and types in Indian cooking. And then it's, oh, I found these 100 websites on Indian food cooking. And by the way, this one is the most highly linked one. So I'm going to give you this, jennyscurry.com site because that one a lot of people respect because a lot of people are linking to it. So that's how search engines work. I became an expert in that space. And it was a search engine crawler technology that utilized information around event information. So it would be around music events, sports events, things like that.
Okay, well, let me ask you this then. So, did your stuff that you would set up, your programs and stuff, get sold to like the big guys like Google and Yahoo and that?
So those guys were too big. So what they wanted was we took our search engine and made it focused around event information. Okay, you wanted to learn about music events, art events, sporting events. We would aggregate this large database of events, and then we would basically turn a feed and sell it to a Yahoo portal. Not the Yahoo search engine, or MSN portal, and say, hey, somebody comes in and search for music events in Seattle or Minneapolis or Chicago. They would search a database, and the database would come from our search engine or our little database aggregating thing. Yeah, it was a pretty advanced system at the time. Again, we're talking 1999, 2000, 2001. And one of our customers who bought the data from us out of Oregon actually ended up buying the company.
Oh, very cool. So, I mean, is it pretty neat to be, so 2001 would have been 20 years ago. So at 35 years old, to be able to, say that you sold a company for millions of dollars in your early 30s. I mean, is that pretty cool?
It's really cool, and it's, the process wasn't easy. Like I said, I failed the one where I had to tell billionaires to F off.
Right.
I went back and kind of said, okay, how am I going to do this? I set a 5-year goal that I want to be a millionaire. after the failure, I wrote down my goals for 5 years. I said, I want to be a millionaire. So what does that mean? In 4 years, I'm going to have to make at least $500,000 or $750,000. 3 years, I'm going to have to make at least $300,000. 2 years out, I'm going to make at least $150,000. And a year out, I'm going to have to make at least 75 or whatever. So I went out and got a job where I made $50,000 the first year. The second year, I made $150,000. Third year, I started the internet company. 2 years later, I ended up selling it. So I achieved my goals around 4 years. And that's not saying that's always going to happen. And so things aren't always going to be. But you got to have goals. You got to have a vision for yourself. You got to have a passion, right? I had a huge passion for internet stuff. I had a huge passion for technology. I was in the forefront buying URLs with very common names. I don't want to say the names here because that would just be super easy to be able to say. But I was buying one-word names that were really popular, domain names, where the addresses are of websites. So things like that, things like Safeware, things like, just popular words like inspiration.com. I didn't buy that one, but you can get the idea from names like that. So I was in the forefront. I was very passionate about technology. And I just had the will, had a vision. I was patient. I was able to make it through because of all of those things that are required. You have to have a desire for your goal. You have to know what you want. And then you got to have a passion around what it is that you're going after. And then you got to have a belief system that, hey, others have done it. Why can't you? And then you got to go to work. You got to go step one. You got to crawl certain things. You got to learn to say no. And you're going to get rejected from investors or customers or whatever. And you just fight your way through it.
I don't know if you knew this about me or not, but I kind of did the same thing. I started off, I bought the domain name Radio Voices because I was a radio guy, and I thought, you know what, I've got a pretty decent voice. I can go out there and sell it, right? So I bought the domain name, figured out how to make a website, figured out how to put my voice on the website. And back in those days, it was a long process. It wasn't as easy as it is now. And then I ended up selling like ads to people in order to have them do their voices. And I had a guy that was on WLS out of Chicago that was on my page for a while. And, it went from, I was making a few $100 a year, maybe $1,000 a year down to nothing. But
yeah. I mean, it's the whole internet and digital space. There's guys out there that are making millions of dollars being, influencers today. And back in the day, we had ads, we had websites before Facebook was around. But now the whole world of digital everything is just a mega business, right? But you and I in our 50s, we were at the forefront of this stuff. We were trying to get into a real, a tech innovation. Today it's all about AI this and AI that, but back then it was all about internet and websites and streaming services and things like that.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of Fall, Rise, Give, where we explore stories of resilience, growth, and giving back. If you enjoyed today's episode, please check out our website at fallrisegive.com. Also, consider subscribing to our podcast on your favorite platform and leaving us a review. Your feedback helps us to continue to bring you inspiring stories. Stay tuned for our next episode. And remember, every fall is a chance to rise, and every rise is an opportunity to give. Until next time, keep falling, rising, and giving. This is Fall, Rise, Give, produced by podcastforhire.com. Thank you for listening.